bringing a beloved restaurant back from the dead, figuring out ways to combat heavy eaters, and hitting it big in Vegas. Buffets have been around for decades, and while it appeared they'd soon go extinct, they've started to come back in a big way. The first buffet-style meals on record were served in the 16th century and were known as Bravensbord, a Swedish tradition meant to give guests something to nibble on before a bigger feast. These meals had a selection of cheese, bread, meat, butter, and other small dishes. The Bravensbord gave way to the Smorgasbord in the 18th century, which was essentially the Bravensbord as a full meal.
And then it went on with a little food, and it goes through the years, and you ended up with the Smorgasbord.
The Smorgasbord eventually went international at the 1939 World's Fair in New York. The difference between a smorgasbord and a U.S. buffet is that the former has an emphasis on Swedish cuisine, while buffets are basically whatever the restaurant management wants them to be. A buffet gives you a chance to sample what you want, when you want, and it does not have the restrained, planned experience that a smorgasbord aims to provide. The huge spreads you think of today when you see a buffet had more humble beginnings in the mid-1940s. El Rancho Vegas casino employee, Herb McDonald, was making a sandwich out of cold cuts and heard some gamblers passing by talking about how hungry they were. Herb supposedly brought out more food for the gamblers, but not a full meal as they couldn't gamble and eat at the same time. That turned into the Buckaroo Buffet, a 24-hour buffet that was so cheap and convenient that gamblers stayed at the resort instead of heading out somewhere else to get late-night meals. The concept of the buffet expanded not only in size but in location. As more hotels and casinos opened up their own versions, Las Vegas soon became known for its buffets, and the concept spread across the country, helped along by the emergence of Chinese buffets in the 50s and 60s. By the 1970s, buffets had become hugely popular and a regular part of dining out for many in the U.S. Buffets had grown into a nationwide phenomenon by the 1970s and 1980s, as restaurants discovered how many customers they could draw in without increasing costs too much. Customers loved the buffets because of the affordable prices and the fact that their picky family members could all find something they wanted to eat without arguing. Part of the success also had to do with the times. The 70s, 80s, and even the 90s were known for consumer excess. The idea of a buffet, where you could take what you want from this outrageously large spread of every conceivable dish, fit perfectly into what people expected at the time. Even fast food companies like KFC and Wendy's opened up their versions of buffets inside their restaurants. Some fast food buffets supposedly still exist, however. KFC has buffets in other countries like Australia and Japan, and there are anecdotal reports of KFC buffets still in operation as of 2024 in southern states such as Tennessee and Kentucky. Unfortunately, the rapid growth of buffets meant that eventually, there were no other customers to draw in except your competitors' customers. People didn't go to a buffet because it was the only one in town. They went to a buffet because they wanted to go to that specific place, while all the other buffets in the area did not get their business. Buffet restaurants have surprisingly thin margins despite their ability to cut back on waitstaff labor costs. While buffet restaurants can also save a lot by providing cheaper food, the problem is that they need a lot of it. So while the basic cost of each food might not be high, the cumulative cost can be enormous. Even if the people eating at the buffet aren't going back for seconds and thirds, the turnover of items at the buffet just to ensure food safety means that the kitchen has to cook and cook and cook. Plus, people often take more food than they can finish, resulting in buffet dishes needing replenishment. That means that even when times are good and the buffet chain is making a profit, it's generally a tiny one. Buffets do what they can to minimize costs both behind the scenes and at the point of purchase for the customer. For example, they'll buy in bulk and concentrate on those less expensive items, like vegetables or cheaper forms of meat. Some chains charge a fee to take home leftovers, and others have looked at policies requiring customers to clean their plates before getting more food. Many buffets in Europe actually charge a fee if you don't finish what's on your plate. Another cost issue buffets face is the phenomenon of heavy eaters. To combat those champions of chowing down, buffet chains will do everything from using smaller serving utensils with more expensive food to using smaller plates.
I mean, they've given me a few warnings for eating too much, but I said, how can I eat too much if it's all I can eat.
All of these strategies have helped the restaurants try to stay afloat over the years, although it wasn't always successful. The 2000s and 2010s saw many buffet chain parent companies, from Ponderosa to Old Country Buffet to Soup Plantation, file for bankruptcy. One company, Ovation Brands, filed 2 more times by 2016 after taking on tremendous debt. Many chains closed a large number of locations as a result, but the bankruptcies weren't the main cause of the chain's problems. They were a result. In some cases, the restaurants just didn't plan well, with customers taking more of those expensive foods than the restaurants had planned on. This isn't that much of a problem when there's a limit to what people can physically eat, but it does happen sometimes. The Great Recession in 2007 to 2009 also took down a few chains. Many buffet chains also had issues with food safety, ranging from contamination with bacteria to contamination with rat poison, as was the case in 2 salad bars in Australia in 2006. Another issue was that people's tastes were changing from wanting pans full of comfort food to more upscale options. By 2019, the landscape already didn't look that great for buffet chains in general. The onset of the pandemic in 2020 was a huge and devastating turning point for many buffets. Even Las Vegas's famous buffets were on shaky ground in the first few months, with restaurants scrambling to find ways to accommodate personal and community safety while also allowing people to continue to eat. As you can guess, a ton of buffets had to close. Chains around the country reported sales numbers that were only a small fraction of what they had been pre-pandemic.
Envision a time when these counters are going to be filled with pizza again?
Hope so. I sure hope so.
Initially, no one knew what would happen. Many Vegas buffets tried to stay open, but the absence of guests was already noticeable even in March 2020. That month, some resort operators announced temporary closures, while others tried to promote hygiene measures, like using hand sanitizers, and increasing how much cleaning their staff carried out. By May 2020, chains were closing permanently, including some nationwide chains with devoted customer bases. Since then, many buffets have returned, but the buffet landscape looks very different than how it did before the pandemic, even during those tougher years of the 2010s. While many buffet chain restaurants suffered and closed during the pandemic, 2 sped off in different directions. One of these chains is Golden Corral. The corporate offices worked with franchise owners to determine ways to move forward. One change was company-wide. Golden Corral began serving food cafeteria style, with employees dishing up food for customers. Golden Corral also focused on adapting to meet local regulations with the help of those local governments. If franchisees had suggestions, the corporate offices listened. The results were extremely beneficial for the chain, as the number of its franchises is growing, and the company was named number 63 for 2023 on Franchise Time's annual ranking of franchises. Meanwhile, Shady Maple's Smorgasbord initially had to close, and then it went through a series of reopenings and closings as the pandemic progressed. When the restaurant was open, it switched to a to-go menu, but it also leaned heavily onto its attached grocery store. Since then, the restaurant has seen very positive growth, as people seek it out because they view its food as fresh and affordable. When your favorite restaurant closes, sometimes your nostalgia for them only grows. That's something that's helped the buffet restaurant industry rise again from the chaos of the pandemic, as nostalgia for specific chains has led to attempts of reopening. Soup Plantation, known as Sweet Tomatoes in states other than California, is a prime example. The buffet chain closed completely in May 2020, essentially because the management couldn't figure out how to create a sustainable business model when no one wanted to take food from a communal table that was only partially protected by a sneeze guard. In May 2022, Dimitri Braverman, in La Mesa, California, claimed he would reopen one Soup Plantation location. By August 2022, Braverman had encountered problems with fire inspections and getting rights to the Soup Plantation name from a Florida company that had bought those rights in 2021. Unfortunately, Braverman's attempt to reopen Soup Plantation eventually failed. However, in April 2024, that company in Florida reopened a Sweet Tomatoes location in Tucson, Arizona, and a copycat chain called Soup and Fresh had a soft opening in Rancho Cucamonga, California, in February 2024. Both have developed enthusiastic customer bases, and the company running Sweet Tomatoes has hinted at expansion. One of the unexpected reasons why buffet restaurants are once again surging in popularity is the fact that they're comparatively cheap given the amount of food you can get. Inflation has been a problem for everyone everywhere. Even fast food prices have become problematic, with almost 80% of Americans claiming fast food is too expensive, as of a May 2024 survey by LendingTree. While some buffets are considered high-end and have very high prices, others have prices that harken back to pre-pandemic days. It doesn't hurt the existing chains that so many other buffets went under during the height of the pandemic. All those customers looking for a deal now have fewer buffets to choose from, so the remaining ones benefit as more customers head their way. For people struggling with the cost of living, an all-you-can-eat buffet dinner that offers such abundance quickly becomes a favorite.